Sick World.
I put the over-under on Harley race speeding tickets at 37.5, and I want to ask Jake and Nick, what do you think? The over-under 37.5 speeding tickets for Harley races life.
Life? Oh, for sure over.
Yeah.
Like, for sure, because just hearing stories like Ric Flair, he said he would get a speeding ticket to, like, crumple up and throw over his shoulder, and then before they had, like, this agreement across the country where, like, if you got a speeding ticket in Missouri, it counted to you in North Carolina. Like, if you got 3 tickets, it would be the equivalent because of your insurance and stuff like that. So, like, there's probably so many middle of nowhere towns in Louisiana. He just rolled it up. It's got to be, like, in the hundreds, I'd say.
I'm going to go under.
Yeah?
Any cop who pulled Harley race over thought twice before riding Harley fucking race a ticket.
That was my thought, too. I was like, there's so many times where Harley just stared at him and the cop went, okay, sir, sorry.
Excuse me, sir. Do you know how fast you were going? As fast as I goddamn wanted to.
Or 139 miles per hour.
I told that motherfucker that I was only going 55 miles per hour, and then he let me go.
That sounds about right. I think we're both right.
All right, welcome to 10 Bell Pod. For over 50 years, the revolutionary force in sports entertainment.
Yo.
I'm Nick Alexander, and I believe Vince Russo supporters are the flat earthers of pro wrestling. Across the country, in the Manning Cave, getting the job guy entrance, Michael Loving.
I think that's an insult to flat earthers.
And job guys as well, so just throw that in there.
And in the opposite corner, from Jackson County, Iowa, fighting out of Troop 83, weighing in at a slightly kayfabe 215 pounds. He is the excellence of tensecution, the extreme camping machine, the Man Scout Jake Manning.
Once again, you have better intros and better taglines than I have ever come up with in my entire career. Also, too, little concerned, you know where Jackson County, Iowa is. Is there some sort of, like, online database that says that now? I don't know how you found that out.
Google, man.
Well, that's scary. So,
and I feel like you kind of blew your wad. Those were so good. I feel like you could have like got 3 out of that intro.
I know. Sometimes I'm like, should I save these for future episodes?
That's good. You got to overwhelm people sometimes.
Well, that's good because I'm coming up with new shirt designs. So you might see a pink and black excellence of execution. So.
And it's recorded, so you got proof for like a lawsuit if you want to try to get some of Jake's money.
Oh, it's recorded now? Well, surprisingly, Don's going to take that part out.
So today we are talking about one of the toughest men to ever live, 8-time NWA World Champion. He was the greatest wrestler on the face of God's green earth. And since Earth is mostly blue, I'm assuming he's from a green Earth from a different galaxy, narrowly escaping a sure death as his planet was being destroyed by Kevin Sullivan. He was sent here on a rocket ship to be found by farmers on our planet and grew up to become the Superman, Harley Race.
One of the best quotes to sum up Harley that I found was like, if I hit someone with my left and he was still standing, I used to run around to the back of him to see who was holding him up.
So Harley is credited as the inventor of the diving headbutt. He is the self-proclaimed one of, if not the first person to go through a table in pro wrestling. What was it about guys from this era, specifically in the 60s and 70s, that made them feel the need to expose the business with pointless high spots?
Well, no, what's funny is I found this out like shortly after Harley passed away. Somebody tweeted us out that Carl Gotch referred to Harley Race as a spot monkey.
Yeah, I heard that.
And, like,
Rob Van Dam, Sabu, Harley Race.
Which thinking about where we're at right now and people is talking about all these spots and Young Bucks and the next generation of guys, it's just like, yeah, we've always done this.
Yeah.
The guy that does more in the ring is just referred to as a spot monkey, and then that generation of people that saw them and loved them are like, no, this is old school. Like, I'm waiting to meet that kid when I'm like in my 70s and 80s that's like, man, I just love that old school wrestling. You know, the way that wrestling used to be back when the Young Bucks used to super kick people 18 times in a match. Like, I'm waiting for that day just so I could get the biggest laugh of all time. Also, too, with the headbutt, like coming up with the diving headbutt, years later, Harley actually said that he regretted coming up with that.
Yeah.
Because of all the damage it did to his body, Dynamite Kid's body. And as a guy that used to do it as an homage to both of those guys, it will fuck you up. Like, I used to do it on a regular basis a couple of times. Top rope and standing. Yeah, and usually I would either hit it or not hit it. And I'd go through periods where I wouldn't use it because I would start to get a pinched nerve in the middle of my back because it would jack you up in a certain way, just depending on how you hit it, in the way that how believable you want to make it look. I mean, you could just take a nice big belly flop, or if you want to make it look like your head's hitting, that's where you're going to get that issues. But I would stop doing it as soon as I'd start getting a pain in my back. And now, since I don't bump anymore, I don't do it at all. So, like, I'll do a standing one, but I ain't coming off the top rope anymore anytime soon.
And much like the WWE, Jake did not mention Chris Benoit in that discussion either. So there we go.
Who are we talking about?
What did I say?
Something. There was a.
I don't know.
That's all I heard.
It's one of those weird things we'll never fucking know.
All right. Harley Leland Race was born April 11th, 1943 in Maryville, Missouri. Harley had one older brother, 4 younger sisters, all born to sharecroppers George and Mary Race.
And also on this day, this one's going to be for Nick. John Montague, British entrepreneur, politician, and nobleman, was also born. This is a terrible one. But his title, and is this a good title for a cooking show that you would have? The 11th Earl of Sandwich. That was his actual fucking title. It's either the best or worst thing ever.
That sounds fancier than Michelin star. Harley would overcome polio as a child. How are anti-vaxxers not using Harley Race as their Jesus? Like the baddest man to ever walk the face of the earth did not have his polio shots.
I told that motherfucker, don't stick me with that needle. I gotta back off on these Harley impersonations.
We got possibly 2 parts to go.
We get 2 parts. I'll make this a 3-parter just by doing Harley impersonations that just start off with "I told that motherfucker."
And this was, as Nick said, this was God's first attempt at killing Harley, and he fucking failed.
So Harley was kicked out of school at the age of 13 he was in a fight with another boy, swung at the boy ducked, and when he did, Harley accidentally decked his principal.
Okay, there's so many stories of this real quick. The one that I heard is that Harley was in a fight with a boy. The principal started kneeing him in the back of the head, and then Harley got pissed off, swung around, and punched and tacked the principal. Either way, Harley's a badass.
I like the idea that he swung at his friend ducked out of the way, and he punched the principal, because then that means that Harley Race got kicked out of school for the most common heel tag team spot of all time. Where
it's too bad he didn't have a chair.
Yeah, exactly. That's the only way it gets better than that. That, or he swings the chair at his friend, hits the top rope, and then the chair bounces back and hits him in the face. That's the only way that it gets any better.
The kid he was fighting, I hope he schoolboyed rolled him up after that while he was distracted.
Totally.
Not long after that, Harley's family would move to Iowa. That's where Jake's from. Out in Iowa, Harley was able to pick up the Chicago territory on the Dumont television network, and from that point on, Harley knew that all he ever wanted to do was become a pro wrestler. Harley began looking for training, and at the age of 15, he linked up with former world champions Stanislaus and Vladek Zabisco, who owned a farm in Missouri. Harley not only assisted on their farm as a laborer, it was there he was also trained to wrestle, because on that farm they had a ring, E-I-E-I-O. And in that ring, they took some bumps.
Oh, God.
I'm
Oh,
sorry.
God.
All right. Okay.
But yeah, it kind of reminds me of when we were talking about Hayabusa and how they would work. They would have to go work their day job, and then right after that, you would just have to fucking train your ass off. But Harley's on a farm doing hardcore farm stuff and then probably getting stretched and beaten the shit out of by two Zbyszkos.
I don't know what it is about like wrestlers when they just want to own a farm, and then like I have a farm. Let's put a ring in it. Like Vern Gagne, he put his ring in a barn.
Mullah, kind of.
I think Jerry Jarrett would train people on his farm. That's where Tommy Rich was trained. So if you're looking for wrestling training, don't Google schools. Just look for somebody with a farm. Chances are there might be a ring in there, especially in the 50s and 60s.
About a year later, Harley would start working matches for St. Joseph promoter Gus Harris, and he'd also receive further training from Ray Gordon. A lot of Harley's early matches would either be at the fancy Chase Hotel or the polar opposite small town carnivals. At the Chase Hotel, everyone dressed up really fancy. They ate fine dining as Harley went to war with people like Cowboy Bob Ellis, Dick the Bruiser, and Johnny Valentine.
If you look at older footage, it's so weird because everybody's in suits and they're like sitting at tables, almost like it's dinner theater. It's almost like the Academy Awards, and they just put up a wrestling ring in there, and these guys came out in trunks and boots, no knee pads, with a towel around their neck, and then they wrestled, and these people were just sitting there smoking in suits and evening gowns. It's very weird to watch.
It's surreal. There's so many good pictures. I haven't seen too much. There's actual video. There's a lot of video footage of this. I've seen mostly pictures.
There's a couple of clips on our St. Louis wrestling collection from that older footage, and it is very weird. There's like 2 or 3 matches on one of our releases for St. Louis wrestling that we got from Larry Madisick, and it's fucking weird.
Yep.
As far as the carnival stuff, Harley described it as a combination of a wrestling show and a wrestling shoot, with the carnival pulling challengers out of the crowd to fight. Sometimes these people would be plants, sometimes Harley himself would be one of these plants, and sometimes they weren't, and on the off chance that some big ol' hoss with farmer strength caught you off guard and you lost, the promoter would pay him your booking fee.
Fuck.
Imagine explaining that to your wife back home. Someone who doesn't do my job professionally beat me at it, so the boss gave them my money. Learn how to use a cotton gin or whatever they did in the 50s. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you're right there. That's definitely where Harley's toughness just got honed, where he knew anything could be coming at him at any time, and he was having to go up against legitimate dudes, show off how legitimate he was, and he turned into the badass he became right there.
Well, and also, too, when I met Harley back in 2005, 2006, people always talk about Stu Hart being like, let me have you. Like kind of grabbing you and shit like that. Like Stu's legendary like that, but Harley was a little bit like that, too. Like, if you spent just enough time with Harley, he'd be like, let me show you something. And I'll never forget this one shoot hold. It's a front face lock, but he, instead of just grabbing it, and just holding it like this, he would say, grab your other forearm underneath here, and it would turn the guy's face sideways and then push it up forward. And he said, if you hang on to that tight enough, you can knock a guy out immediately.
Just the blood choke.
Jesus.
Yeah.
It's just out.
Yeah. I'll show it on Michael later. I'll do it for podcast. I'll put him to sleep in the middle of this podcast. So
well, it'll be all audio. You'll just hear a big boom,
and then all of a sudden it's just you and me, Nick, for the rest of the show. So.
Working for Gus Harris would also lead to one of Harley's first regular jobs in pro wrestling, when Harley would be asked to be the driver for the over 700-pound Happy Humphrey.
You're 700 to 1,000 pounds, and then he ended up losing it later in life.
Oh, he did?
Yeah.
I missed that.
Yeah, I guess he got down to 220 later in his later years.
That wasn't with surgery or anything?
Well, he had a surgery
Okay.
for sure. That was definitely with a surgery, but we're talking maybe 70s surgery to do that? So there should be more discussion about Happy Humphrey, to be really quite honest. The fact that the man was anywhere from 700 to 1,000 pounds and then got down to 220 when he's like, yeah, I'm done wrestling. I'm done being this fat. I'm just going to get down to 220.
I for sure thought he was going to die of type 2 diabetes or something, but I didn't follow up on it.
No, he lived to a very ripe old age, and there's a picture of him in Harley's documentary of him in the pant leg of one of his old pants.
Oh, fuck. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
And it's insane. I thought it was remarkable that at one point in time I was almost 280 and then got down to 173 in less than a year.
Damn.
But fuck that. The fact that this guy was like 700 pounds to 1,000 pounds and got down to 220.
And as has been brought up on some other podcasts, Harley paid his dues by having to wash Humphrey's ass after every time he took a shit because he physically could not wipe his own ass.
Squat goals. This is a bad segue, and now we get to a brutal, heart-wrenching story about a horrible tragedy in Harley's life. Christmas Day, 1960, Harley was driving his pregnant wife, who he had been married to for just about a month, when an 18-wheeler moved into Harley's lane, more or less hitting Harley's car head-on. His wife, Vivian Louise Jones, was killed instantly, while Harley was left in shambles, fighting for his own life. Harley's leg came close to being amputated. When Gus Harris heard this, he raced to the hospital and stopped the amputation from going through. In doing so, he not only saved Harley's leg, he preserved one of the greatest careers in wrestling history. Just imagine the butterfly effect from removing Harley Race from pro wrestling.
9/11 doesn't happen? I don't know. There's something.
I was going to go a little bit more sensitive on that, but
I
I was going to go over the fact of just it'll come up later in Harley's life how much respect Harley had for different promotions in the NWA. As we'll see later, the respect that the NWA community and all these promoters gave Harley and the amount of respect that Harley gave back. If Harley has a bad experience early on with a promoter, I don't think he does that.
Oh, good point.
So the fact that this one promoter was good to him early in his career, he wasn't like Roddy Piper, where Roddy Piper views every promoter as enemy number one. Where Harley's like, no, these promoters are good to me. I will be good to them, and that's how he sees his worldview.
Hell yeah. And was this where he fucked up his arm and got the plate in it? Was it this wreck?
Yep.
On the Arha video shoot, one of the best moments is when Harley holds his forearm up to the fucking screen and smacks it, and it sounds like he's hitting the trunk of a 600-year-old fucking oak tree. It's just... And it's just thinking about him in matches and using that shit really makes you wince every time you watch a match.
After the wreck, doctors told Harley that not only was his wrestling career over, he would never walk again. So Gus took Harley to a specialist who operated on his leg and arm, saving them both. Harley would go through brutal rehab, but he clawed his way back to the ring, having a handful of matches in 62, making a full return in 63. And for Harley's first match back, he made sure his doctor was in attendance to watch him wrestle. It was while driving Happy Humphrey that Harley was able to make connections in Nashville, Tennessee, and he began working there under the ring name Jack Long in 1963, forming a tag team with his brother literally from another mother, John Long. The duo captured the Southern Tag Team Championship before surrendering them at Appomattox.
And man, that's such a common thing. You've got this guy who's super over, and then you're like, oh, this guy looks like that guy. Go ahead and be his brother.
Right.
Like that's, and even like into the 80s and almost 90s, they were doing that. That's how Ricky Steamboat got his name, because he looked like Sam Steamboat in Florida. And then like every Anderson ever, with the exception of Gene, even like Gene's stepson is not a real Anderson. Like his own son, not even an actual Anderson. Just you think of all of the people, even Johnny Rich, definitely not, because they said that he was a cousin to Tommy Rich, because Tommy Rich was so over in Georgia. Just the multitude of guys that are like, oh, you look like that guy. That's your new name now. That's your new name now, because you look like that guy. Everybody's going in and out of territories like, oh, we just lost a Steamboat. Well, you look like the last Steamboat. Now I'm going to make my money with you. And guys are like, okay, all right, sure, fine.
After a few months in Tennessee, Harley hopped back to the Central States territory before landing in the Funk's Amarillo, Texas territory. He'd also returned to using his real name, Harley Race, after his father told him that he shouldn't work so hard to make someone else's name famous. And I never really considered this. Back in the day, they were like, if wrestling's real and your name is real,
what?
Who the fuck is Sterling Golden, Terry?
Why?
Well, the surname thing is a big issue in my family. My uncle gives me a hard time just about every time I post on Facebook because my Facebook is changed over to Jake Manning now.
Right.
I'm no longer using my real name on Facebook, where for a long time I used my real name, but because of comedians trying to get up with me for shows, they could finding Jake
who the
Feuerbach is like a big to do. But like as soon as I did that, and my mother showed that to my father, it broke his heart because my dad basically sits on Ancestry.com and looks at like family trees, like the lineage of our family back to like the 1800s or as far back as he can go. And in the fact that I have not produced him a son, me being the only son, I could just picture him looking at Ancestry.com and looking like at a family tree, like in a branch that just dies off, and him like just sighing in the middle of the night, realizing this son will never produce an heir to continue on his branch of the Feuerbach family, and also to the fact that I'm Jake Manning. But don't worry, once I do something crazy because of all the massive head trauma that I have, they'll be thankful that I'm using a surname. So there you go, Dad.
Once I make the news, you'll be thankful.
Yep.
1964 would be the year that Harley and Larry Hennig formed a tag team and moved to American Wrestling Association. And in the AWA, handsome Harley Race and pretty boy Larry Hennig quickly became top contenders in the tag team title scene. On January 31st, 1965, they beat Dick the Bruiser and the Crusher to win the AWA Tag Team Championship.
There's no footage of this that I could find. There's pictures, but I did as much digging as I could, and all my deep nook and cranny internet stuff, I couldn't find any footage of this stuff.
Oh, I probably got some 8mm footage somewhere lying around. I might be able to dig up somewhere.
That'd be cool.
They'd hold the belts for most of 65 and 66, trading them for short times with Vern Gagne and the Crusher, as well as Dick the Bruiser and the Crusher. Vern was their main rival and attempted to dethrone Larry and Harley with various partners like Ernie Ladd, Danny Hodge, and Wilbur Schneider, who has a good story about a boat. Sorry.
I don't even. What's that?
Someone named Wilbur Schneider probably has a good story about a boat. I feel like anyone named Wilbur has a good story.
You did.
Let's fucking get into our favorite segment of the show, where I say you put some goddamn respect on Wilbur Schneider's name, one of the better fucking shooters of all time and most respected grappler of the entire Midwest era.
Ha ha ha! Nick's on the receiving end of this shit.
I don't like
time.
it. I don't like how it feels. I don't want it.
You were doing the Wilbur. I was like, is he doing a Mr. Ed reference? What the fuck's going on?
He was a mean motor scooter, as they would say. Like, don't you dare besmirch the name of Wilbur Schneider.
And just to get some Harley shoot interview opinions on there, he thought Vern was the nicest guy, but when it came to promotions or business, he's the absolute shits, even as back as the early 60s. And I don't know the exact date, but I heard one match that really pushed Harley to worldwide fame and really got his name out there was a Loser Leaves Town match with him and Vern in the late 60s that really propelled Harley way up to the top.
In January of 67, Harley and Larry got their titles back for a third and final time, beating Dick the Bruiser and the Crusher once again. They go on another tear through the AWA until Larry got legit hurt when a ref fell into Larry's leg, basically chop blocking him and blowing out his knee that October. Vern Gagne would do an angle where he broke Hennig's leg, and the AWA did an angle where they let Harley keep the belts and choose a new tag partner. Harley chose Chris Markoff, which Harley said their pairing was good, but just not as good as him and Larry Hennig. Harley and Markoff would lose their first title defense in November to Pat O'Connor and Wilbur Schneider, who has strong opinions about saltwater taffy.
I like that one a lot more. That was good.
Just you wait till the fucking ghost of Wilbur Schneider comes up and fucking stretches her ass. You'll put some fucking respect on his goddamn name.
For the next several months, Race teamed with Hard Boiled Haggerty and would do a good bit of singles matches, even getting some shots at Vern Gagne's AWA title. By early 68, Harley's partner Larry returned, and although they'd start tagging up again, they'd never have another run with the belts. Harley would finish up 68, working with AWA, staying out of the title scene before leaving the company to begin his historic run as a singles competitor in the National Wrestling Alliance. I think it was this point he had the car wreck.
It was around this point. It was just listening to different people talking about it. I was like, okay, there was a car wreck here, and then there was a car wreck here, and then there was the boat wreck, and then there was another car, and it just all fucking like bleeds together. And it's like, how the fuck is Harley alive? We'll get into that more, but it's somewhere around here where Harley had dangerous car wreck number 2.
And then he was like, I told that motherfucker, am I going to lose a leg or not? And when he said no, I was like, good.
As Terry Funk said, he never left in time, but always got there on time.
Same can be said about Jake Manning. And people complain all the time, like, oh, Jake is always getting speeding tickets. I'm like, well, you guys never complain when you guys show up late and we get there on time. So...
Harley would kick off his NWA run in January of '69 in NWA Hollywood, which he soon left because he hated the traffic. You are preaching to the choir, Harley.
Oh, let's all cry for the guy in Los Angeles.
But in the 60s, where a lot of people didn't have cars.
Good point.
Like, it was bad then. It was poorly designed then.
And it's just like throughout time, nothing changes. People are shitty drivers forever and ever.
Also, too, like the Hollywood territory was very star-based. Like, if you didn't have a big star that was getting over at the time, the territory took like a big dip. But if they had like somebody in there who was drawing a lot of money, it was a really good territory to be in.
I don't really know who was like big names in...
Piper had a pretty good run.
Yeah.
Fred Blassie had some good runs. I think John Tolis even was big at the time. I know that's definitely, I think, one of the guys out there. The big thing that was a big draw like in those California areas were like the battle royals.
Right.
So
spectacle.
If it's about the time for and I think they did that like once a year, like they did a big battle royal and have Andre the Giant out there, or they have some bigger names. Usually when it's getting close to battle royal time, that was usually when they made a lot of money. So it's a weird territory, and I would like to read more about it, but there's not a lot about it. But I think because of those infrequencies of ups and downs and around, Piper's the only one that really kind of comes to mind. Like Piper and Chavo Guerrero is the only thing that's very noteworthy of that entire territory.
After leaving Hollywood, Harley would do the usual territory traveling, but his home base seemed to mostly be in Amarillo with the Funks. Harley would spend late '69 making his first trip to Japan to work for the Japan Wrestling Alliance. There, he'd work against young wrestlers before they came the legends they're known as today, Antonio Inoki and Giant Baba.
I thought one of the most interesting things that Harley talked about on that was he was one of the first Americans that would actually sell and bump his ass off for the young Japanese wrestlers, because at the time most of the other American wrestlers would just kind of go in there and take it as a holiday and not really put the time in, and Harley got a lot of heat for it, but he was the one to actually start putting those young guys over, which started all the love and respect that Japan had for Harley.
Which is weird, because that always seems to happen in different places at different times. Like Jimmy Valiant, when he went down to Memphis for the first time, when it was like Johnny and Jimmy Valiant, and they were wrestling Bill Dundee and Jerry Lawler, and Johnny Valiant was like, I ain't fucking bumping for these little motherfuckers. Fuck them. But Jimmy was like, no, I'm going to bump for him. Bumped around for him, and turns out those are the two guys that were booking the territory.
Yeah, there you go.
And Jimmy Valiant always had a job in Memphis whenever the fuck he wanted it, and Johnny Valiant, I don't know if he ever wrestled in Memphis ever again.
He's just hanging out in a room with his pride, jerking off, not doing anything.
And surprisingly, Harley's bumping around for Inoki and Baba and all the young boys and the guys that are coming up and the guys they're going to work for and Saruta and everybody else, and they're like, oh yeah, I want to work with that guy, but the guys that don't bump around, I don't want to work with.
Yeah.
It's weird how there's that mentality, well, I have to protect myself. And guess what? By protecting myself, I have now wrestled my way out of a job.
Yeah. Pride doesn't always mean intellect.
Not pride, stupidity. Let's not give these people credit.
There's a lot. Okay.
Let's give these people stupidity.
But pride bleeds into that whole fucking line.
All right, cool.
In 1970, Harley would buy into the NWA itself, getting a part of the Kansas City territory. Was that territory ever good? Because Harley ultimately lost money on the territory. And then I heard George South talk about Kansas City, and he hated it. Never hear good things about it.
Well, when George went there, it was after it already tanked that first time when Bob Geigel had it. Yeah. And Bob Geigel, was pretty much kind of running it. Like Harley was like a name that was attached to it. I highly doubt he was doing the work that a lot of the day-to-day work. I think Bob Geigel had a lot of the day-to-day work. And if you hear stories about Bob Geigel, like especially I think when he was NWA president, like he would just show up in shower shoes and just kind of lazy and laid back and never really wanted to put in the work. And I think there might have been a couple other people involved in the Kansas City territory. And it was a smaller territory. I mean, it's running a lot of the smaller shows and spot towns. And keep in mind, it's very close to like McGurk and Bill Watts' territory, so they don't have a wide reach. So, Kansas City is probably like little towns in Iowa and most of Missouri, maybe a few Nebraska and towns out there. So it's very in the middle of nowhere, Midwest, small farming communities. Not a lot of money there. It's not like running a Chicago, like Watts. They have the big towns like New Orleans. There's a lot of money there. World Class has Dallas. There's a lot of money there. AWA has Chicago, Minneapolis. Georgia has Atlanta. Obviously, the Mid-Atlantic territory, they've got your Richmonds, your Charlottes, your Raleighs. You got big towns that kind of prop it up. Even Memphis has Nashville and Memphis, where like Kansas City, you just basically kind of just have Kansas City because St. Louis is its own little thing, so you're not really a part of that. So you're kind of like, you don't have like a big metropolitan area to kind of prop it up and tent pole the whole territory. So that's why it's probably a little bit tougher to manage. That's my opinion on it.
Obviously, this is when Hulk Hogan started devising his evil plan to take down Kansas City, but we'll get into that later. Nick didn't want to bring that shit up.
Over the next 3-ish years, Harley would tear through the territories, mostly hanging out in Texas and central states. He'd get his hands on some regional titles without getting a lot of love from the national spotlight. But Harley's life and career would change forever in 1973. So a version of this story goes, the NWA wanted to put the title on Jack Briscoe. However, champion Dory Funk Jr. may or may not have not wanted to drop the belt to Jack for reasons ranging from not wanting to lose to another babyface to beef going back to the Funk's territory. So what may or may not have happened was days before Dory was supposed to drop the belt to Jack, he was possibly involved in a truck accident on his farm that put him out of action. The NWA, now realizing that the title change was going to be a whole thing, decided to put the belt on a transitional champion, and in stepped Harley Race. It was not just Harley's professionalism that got him this title shot, it was his reputation of being a bad man, as the NWA used Harley as their own Richard Iceman Kalinsky to make damn sure the belt was going to be traded smoothly.
Wow, that reference, Nick. Every wrestling podcast needs a 90s HBO true crime documentary reference.
And also, too, with Harley, that's a easy choice. If we're going to believe that Dory Funk intentionally didn't want to drop it to Jack Briscoe because of heat there and professional jealousy, Harley's the most logical person because Harley's got a good relationship with the Funks because of the time he spent in the Amarillo territory previously. Also, too, with Harley running Kansas City, he's kind of in the brethren of the NWA. Also, too, with Kansas City's proximity to St. Louis, which is the territory run by Sam Munchnick. And Sam Munchnick was basically like whatever he said at the NWA board meetings, people stood up and listened. He had such respect amongst the board members, and Sam had a tremendous amount of respect for Harley. Also, two people that were on Harley's side, Fritz von Erich and Eddie Graham. Fritz probably loved Harley a considerable amount, and obviously years later he loved Harley for everything that Harley did for his kids. And his kids were going into St. Louis. I don't know if they were coming in at this particular time. This is probably a little bit before the kids were wrestling, but I'm sure Harley had plenty of matches with Fritz over the years as well, so there's a tremendous amount of respect. So you say also because he's a bad motherfucker, but I think that's underplaying how much respect he had amongst the board members. So if they're like, well, we really want it on Jack, Dory's not going to do the honors, we need to put somebody here in the middle, and Harley just makes the most sense. Consider him an interim champion and just kind of a guy that passed it along. But I think a lot of them felt like, no, we could see him as a champion someday. Maybe not here right now, but let's put him on and see what happens. I think that it kind of downplays what they had. I think they felt like, especially probably Sam. I would imagine Sam Munchnick was like, no, I could see Harley Race as a real world champion. And I think a lot of people stood up and listened to that when Sam Munchnick said. Theoretically, if you said it. I wasn't in the meetings. I wasn't in NWA board meetings in 1973. I know I look old enough to be but
say something, but
I'm just saying I got a feeling that probably Sam Nochnik was the guy, considering the way that Harley was always booked in St. Louis and the amount of respect that Sam had. I think Sam was kind of the key to kind of push that through, and considering Harley's time in Amarillo before this, I don't think the Funks were gonna budge on that at all. Like, yeah, Harley's a good guy. I got no problem dropping it to him. And also, too, the Funks probably didn't see Harley as that big of a threat at the time. Mm-hmm. They're like, oh, yeah, he's a good guy. He deserves it. Yeah, why not?
We'll always be the Funks.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, they still were, but yeah.
No matter what side of the story you want to believe, Harley met Dory Funk Jr. May 24th, 1973 for the NWA Heavyweight Championship. At the end of the match, Dory was arguing with a ref after what he perceived as a slow count. Harley hops up, surprises Dory with a kick, some elbows, hit him with a suplex, and ended Dory's nearly 5-year title run.
And just to give you an idea of just the evolution of wrestling, and I mean, the context is there, and at the time it was fucking worthy of a finish, but 2 out of 3 falls match, and one of the biggest wins of Harley's career, and he beats Dory with a common suplex. Nowadays, people probably look at it and think, just a suplex? Because I was kind of surprised, but I mean, it just shows how much wrestling has evolved. It applies to every art form. It's just the context at the time, what was normal, what was big, what was the new kind of oh shit move. The suplex made sense, but it just shows how much the evolution of wrestling has come for.
Now, like I said, Harley was supposed to only be a transitional champion holding the belt for a couple of weeks, but he did such a great job, he was given a couple of months with it. He was able to defend it in Central States, the Funks territory, Crockett, before heading down to Paul Bosch's Houston territory that July to face Jack Briscoe.
Which is actually where Dory was supposed to drop it originally, and just showing the respect and the working relationship the NWA had at the time. Having a title switch in your territory is a big deal, because then that lets people know that anytime that a NWA world title match is booked in my territory, in my arena, you might see a title change. So make sure you fork over that money to go see it.
Yeah.
So Paul Bosch being screwed over and not getting that title switch is a big deal. It's a lot of money. So the NWA, like, well, Jack was supposed to win it on this date against Dory. Well, we will rebook it again and make sure that it happens in your territory, Paul, because you are a part of this alliance. So it just shows how respect and how they honored that, and it's just good to see that, like, at the end of the day, Paul Bosch got an NWA title switch in Houston with Jack Briscoe.
And also to defend Dory on people that might have thought he was full of shit. Dory never had a reputation of pulling out or being hard to work with or be like, I don't want to drop the belt to him, blah, blah, blah. I think this was like one of the only matches he's ever pulled out of in his career, so...
we've had some difficulties working with Dory Funk Jr. at highspots.com, so I would disagree with that.
Hey, just because Dory wants a good fucking, mocha and you can't get it to him on time doesn't mean that, he refuses to drop the belt every time.
Before the match with Jack Briscoe, the NWA revealed a brand new belt, making Harley the last person to hold the Lou Thez era belt, and technically the first person to hold the new NWA title, which is probably the NWA title most people picture in their head when you say NWA. It's like with the rectangle plates and all the countries' flags on it.
Yeah.
During the match, Harley took the first fall before he caught Jack in the figure 4, but the third and final fall was won by Jack Briscoe, ending Harley's first run with the belt.
Harley talks about how losing the belt lit a big fire under his ass because he knew that he had what it took to be at that level, and he had so much motivation to get back to that level after that short taste that it really just got him going.
Although Harley's first run was short, since he had handled the entire situation as a professional and with class, it allowed Harley to stay on everyone's radar, gain great name recognition, which would lead to future title shots. After dropping the belt, Harley went back to Japan to work with the newish All Japan promotion, mostly facing Giant Baba in a series of tag matches with various partners. Harley would return to the States and go on an absolute fucking tear, running through the territory, snatching up almost every belt in sight, including
8 Central States Heavyweight Championships, 7 Missouri Heavyweight Championships, a Georgia Heavyweight Championship, a Stampede North American Championship, that's in Canada for people who don't know, Japan-based NWA United National Heavyweight and PWF World Heavyweight Championship, and he was the first holder of the Mid-Atlantic United States Championship, which still is defended as the WWE US Championship to this day.
And that Missouri belt that he won was usually the precursor to the NWA title. If you were being groomed to be the NWA World Heavyweight Champion, they would put the Missouri title on you because it's the St. Louis, it's basically the St. Louis Territory's main belt, featured belt, and St. Louis had really great TV. Sam Muchnick ran it, and if you did well for Sam and Drew in the Checker Dome and in his territory, you were seen as possibly the next guy for the NWA World title. Like Ted DiBiase has won it. I think a lot of the Von Erichs, like anybody that was ever in discussion, they would give them a run with the Missouri title, see how they would work. Because if you could do well on St. Louis's TV, then they're like, okay, well, you're going to do well on Mid-Atlantic's TV, Georgia's TV, and everybody else in the entire alliance. St. Louis was kind of like the proving ground for the next NWA World title. And if you see a lot of the old Missouri title holders, they were eventual NWA World title holders or guys that were in the discussion.
Definitely a who's who of badasses throughout wrestling history.
So all that led to February 6, 1977, when Harley Race would meet NWA champion Terry Funk in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. I found a clip of most of this match, and it's really fun, good back and forth. But the ref, why did refs back in the day count like a 1, I'ma hit it again, 2, I'ma hit it again, 3, and like they counted so bad?
Because they're probably like old fucks that are like,
They got brittle bones, Nick.
because there might be a state athletic commission where like, no, you have to use our official referees. Like there was like a really shitty ref in Chicago that they always had to use. There's some shitty ones in the New York territory. Like you look at some of the old Madison Square Garden footage, you're like, there's some really fucking bad refs because you had to fucking use them because they're like brother worked for the athletic commission and they just were fucking awful, like just fucking horrendous. So like that's just one of those things that somebody might have been grandfathered in, and because like I'm like, well, this guy has to referee the world title match because he is the head official here in the Toronto area because we have an athletic commission. So you ran into that a lot in certain places. Not everybody's a Tommy Young. That's why someone like a Tommy Young stood out during this time, because like, oh, a good referee, thank fucking God.
Yeah, I will agree that watching this, the drama of the 3 count or just reffing is very important. Just like, I guess, just watching Ring of Honor in its heyday and the rest, which is the big dramatic kind of circle. Like you see the whole rotation of the drama of the 3 count, I guess, if you want to say, and then like just the All Japan stuff where the refs would count and then they would stop on the 3 count and it would propel their entire body up into the air to stop the fucking momentum. Like, I mean, it did remind me, like, man, some of these 3 counts could have been a whole lot fucking better.
It made me appreciate modern day refs and how important they are to matches, and I don't think we ever really like pay attention to that. So you know what? Hug your local ref. Hug your local ref. For this match, Harley would eventually start working Terry Funk's leg before locking Terry in the most painful hold in pro wrestling, the dreaded Indian Deathlock, causing Terry to tap, gaining Harley his second NWA World Championship.
This clip has caused probably one of the biggest debates in my entire life.
What the fuck?
And my biggest contention. I love and I respect Harley Race.
This is a disclaimer before.
Let me say this right up front. And let me explain where we are today. So he locked in Harley Race's version of the Indian Deathlock, which is he locks it in very similar to the way Paul Jones does, but instead of falling straight back so you're in a line with the wrestlers, like, you know,
you're parallel.
Yeah. He's more perpendicular, making an intersection and then pushing his foot against the guy's knee. So he's more off to the side.
Right.
Which I don't think is a sturdy enough lock into the Indian Deathlock. But he did that and he called it the Indian Deathlock. And then Triple H saw that and started using the Indian Deathlock like Harley. And then they would mention it on commentary, it's the Indian Deathlock. When in actuality, Paul Jones' Indian Deathlock was a little bit different because he's parallel with the guy. And anybody that's ever been locked in that particular version of the Indian Deathlock, no, it's a little bit more of, like, it is for sure a fucking Deathlock.
Yeah.
Like, I've had guys try and roll it onto me, like, you know, you do the figure 4 spot where the guy reverses
Right.
rolls, but you can't fucking do that because you'll die. Hence, Deathlock. Okay,
It's really attacking like your kneecap, or what's it?
no.
Or
It's
it's-
just, there's you're hooking it with your toe.
Yeah.
Where like with Harleys, you're kind of more like you've pinched it in from the side.
But all the pressure from the move is going where on the opponent exactly?
It's just right on the knee.
Just yeah. That's, yeah.
So yeah, and you're kind of just making like a figure 4, but more of a pushing of the 4. It's a little bit sharper of a V with the bend in the leg
Yeah.
than anything, and then you're locked in. Where like Harley's more pushing off to the side with it, and that's all fine and well. It's definitely a variation, but when people are locking in the Harley race version of the Indian Deathlock and they're saying like, oh, this is a tribute to Paul Jones, I'm like, no, motherfucker, that is not how it's done. And then everybody thinking that's the only way to do the Indian Deathlock. Like, I'll put the Indian Deathlock in the way Paul Jones does it, and people are like, what fucking move was that? That fucking like I don't understand what that was. Was that a messed up figure 4? Like, no, that's the fucking Indian Deathlock. And then people are like, well, actually the Indian Deathlock is like this because you saw Harley race it. No. This is why I feel like Paul Jones' Indian Deathlock is superior, because Paul Jones got it from a guy, I believe like a WWF, I think, job guy who was an actual Native American, but he might have been an Italian guy playing a Native American.
It's definitely
Regardless,
possible.
that makes it more legitimate. And he got it from him, who was the guy who invented it. I think it might have like Billy White Eagle or something like that.
Fuck.
Billy White Eagle gave it to Paul Jones, and Paul Jones got it because he had a feud with Wahoo.
Oh,
and
okay.
then George South got it from Paul Jones because Paul Jones is his favorite wrestler, and then taught it to me. And Paul Jones was doing the Indian Deathlock, his version of it, before Harley did it here. So I'm sure what happened is Harley heard about Paul Jones having an Indian Deathlock, and you don't have YouTube, so you can't look it up. Didn't have tapes or DVDs to pass around to figure out how to do a move. He probably just heard somebody like, yeah, when Paul did it, he kind of did this, and I don't remember what happened after that. And then Harley just kind of freestyled the end of it, and that's what we got.
Yeah.
And so when I see there are 2 different versions of the Indian Deathlock. There is not, everybody thinks that there is one, but there's actually 2, and very few people know the actual original version of the Indian Deathlock. And I've researched this with Dick Bourne, who runs the Mid-Atlantic Gateway, and we've discussed this in great detail, and we can definitely trace back. Before Harley Race was doing the Indian Deathlock, Paul Jones doing the Indian Deathlock. So actually, the true innovator and guy that was pushing it forward was Paul Jones. So that's just.
And for more on that, because I think we get into it in that episode, our Paul Jones episode, if you, for all your Indian Deathlock needs, go back and listen to our Paul Jones episode.
If we want to cut that on our Harley Race episode, because it is very derogatory, but that is truly the difference, and I will scream it on top of a mountain to the day I die.
Just a slight criticism. It's good.
It's not
and
a
healthy.
criticism. It's a criticism of other people. Harley Race can do whatever fucking hole he wants. Let's be clear. He can do
You're
whatever.
basically a cop trying to give Harley a speeding ticket right now. No shit, just do whatever you want.
I told that motherfucker I invented my own version of the Indian Deathlock. All respect due to Paul Jones, but I have my own because I'm the greatest wrestler on God's green earth.
Once Harley had the belt again, he punched the time clock and basically never clocked out. This is the legend of Harley Race that you hear, going town to town, making all the locals look great while still keeping the belt. He'd defend it more or less every single day of the week. And remember, this isn't a 12-minute match on Raw. These are 1-hour Broadways, which I say as a compliment to Harley Race because he's great and he did work his ass off. But sometimes I get annoyed with these old-timers who are like, we went an hour every night, daddy. But it's like, yeah, but 47 minutes of it was the same headlock from 46 minutes ago. What are you
Yeah, but
bragging
guess
about?
what? The audience was fucking riveted the entire fucking time because they cared about that belt and they cared about those two competitors that they either hated or fucking loved. And every inch of that headlock meant something. It was fucking exciting.
And you're building to the last 20 minutes that are
Right?
a little bit more upbeat and fast paced. Like if you see a lot of those hour Broadways, they do
They do.
start off.
Okay, I
They
agree
kind of.
with that.
I agree. They start there, but once you get into it and kind of the flow, it's like watching a football game. Do you really give a fuck about the first quarter? It gets a little exciting there, right as you're going into halftime, the last 2 minutes. Then the third quarter's whatever, and then all of a sudden, when you get into the fourth quarter, like the way that we view a football game is about the flow of a 1 hour Broadway.
And I want Jake to talk on this. The thing that I think Shane Douglas brought this up, that Harley's traveling all these different territories, hooking up with their main eventer, and he's doing 60-minute draws with these people. But in today's age, you probably know the moveset of Caleb Connolly more than he does, or Zane, and you know how to deal with that. But Harley's going to these territories doing 60-minute Broadways with dudes he's never fucking seen anything about, and he's just working with it and making them look good just on the fly, just with being who he is.
Wrestling was different then.
Yeah.
There was a small set of moves that everybody should know. Like I saw the hour Broadway that Harley had with Jerry Lawler.
Yeah.
And Jerry Lawler was doing things that I've never seen Jerry Lawler ever do.
Yeah.
Like he was doing leg drops,
Yeah, it was
which
weird.
he should never do leg drops. Sorry, Jerry. I love you. You're not a leg drop guy.
It looked dangerous. I was like, oh, God.
But fucking Harley Race called leg drop. Motherfucker, you doing leg drop. He did the best he could and not to hurt him. So it's one of those things where Harley's calling stuff that these guys should know because you got a list of anywhere from 20 to 30 to 50 moves that everybody should know.
Right.
And sometimes he's even finding out, like, he'll call a move and the guy fucks it up or it looks like shit. And Harley's like, guess we're not doing that again. Like, he'll just make a decision and then he'll just tell a story a different way or stick with what's working or he'll just find something. Yeah, he did that with a lot of people. Like, okay, well, this is working and this is working. We can do this and we can do this. Just out there. He'll figure it out. He'll call a move to a guy. The move looks good and it's working. We're going to come back to it. We're going to tell a story with that. And then there's other times where he's got an entire hour Broadway already laid out. Like there's a great story of, I think him and Jack or him and Dory Jr. One night, Harley just walked into the locker room, walked over to Dory and was like, are we doing the Kansas City Broadway or are we doing the Houston Broadway? Yeah.
But then he named like two other ones too. They had like 4 Broadways they could do.
It's just like a headlining comic.
Yeah.
It's just they have a different hour to shop out, and it just depends on whatever audience. So it's basically like Jerry Seinfeld. Like Jerry Seinfeld's got his younger kid headlining set, or he's got his older audience, or his corporate gig. It's very similar to that.
But Nick is totally on point. You go back and watch the older Harley matches, you have to know what you're in store for. There are wars of attrition. They, like I said, every inch matters, every hold and every little small advantage matters, because when you don't see the NWA champ in your city and you finally get to see him, and every time the person you want to win gets a slight advantage, you're losing your shit. And people are going bonkers over this stuff. And if you're going in there expecting a constant back and forth and high spots and then a rousing, 10-minute finishing sequence, you're not going to get it. But when you put it in the proper context, this shit's fucking good. And the audience reactions and to see how much hold they have over the audience back then is what makes the matches so interesting and good. But Nick is spot on. I watched so many fucking headlock exchanges. The best one, Harley's opponent has him in a headlock. Harley's on his back. Harley kind of rolls the guy eventually onto their back, and then they bridge up and then slam Harley back down to the mat. I marked out like a motherfucker on that. It's the small little spots that you don't see these days that they were really good at back then. And the one thing that was also interesting, just learning about Broadways and traveling around, going to the territories, is that according to Harley, before him, the NWA champion came in and would kind of destroy the territory main eventer and make them look like shit. But what Harley wanted to put them over and put the belt over, because he said the NWA belt was there to make opponents for it. And that's what drew up more business. That's what made a lot of money. And that's what got him going. So when you do a 60-minute Broadway, Harley doesn't lose, the other guy doesn't lose, and they both look like they're tough as fuck.
When you say previous NWA champions, are you saying Dory Funk Jr. bad for business? I'm just saying, back to the conspiracy. There wasn't no truck accident. It was staged. It's all staged. It was all staged.
Who cut the brakes on the truck? Huh?
But yeah, also back to your point, another thing that Harley did very well, and as a guy who's had to wrestle people that are less than, it's putting it nicely, is Harley would have spots that he could basically do with a broomstick, and certain cells that was spectacular. Like, you know, if a guy just knew how to throw a punch, Harley could spill out through the ropes and end up upside down and do this flip here or fall down. If the guy just breathed on him a certain way, Harley could do these things that just make the guy look good, and the guy just has to just be in the vicinity of Harley Race, and he'll make you look good. Much like Flair later on had spots that he could do. But Harley was really kind of probably the first NWA champion to have a repertoire like that. Like, okay, well, here's a set of things for you to do to me where I will be so over the top in how I put it over.
And to go on that point, just we're going to get into this since we're talking about it. Did you guys get into the George Goulas, Nick Goulas thing? Jake, do you know about that? Nick Goulas was the big promoter, and it was one of the most... Goulas, yeah.
You're saying goulash. Nick Goulash and George Goulash.
They were from Poland.
Yeah.
But apparently, George was basically one of the biggest examples of nepotism in the history of wrestling.
George Goulas is awful. He's fucking horrendous. They teamed him with Bob Eaton, and even that tag team suffered with Bob Eaton, one of the greatest professional wrestlers of all time, could not drag George Goulas up to a fucking baseline of professional wrestler.
That's the story that I found when I dug deep in. And that so George Goulas, I don't even remember the proper way to say it now. He actually got an NWA title shot against Harley at the time. And it's either a 37-minute DQ or 45-minute Broadway or an hour Broadway. But Harley made George look so fucking good that Nick, his dad, lost his absolute shit in the back. It's like, you made my boy! You made my boy! And so, I mean, apparently, one of the biggest examples of just how fucking good Harley was and could make people look good was George Goulas. It's like that's it. You made George look good. You're the GOAT. One quick good story of Harley and Abdullah the Butcher in Japan. They ended up brawling out into the streets. The crowd follows Abdullah and Harley brawling into the streets. Like 7 or 8 taxi cabs have to stop in the middle of the street. The crowd wants to watch the match so much they get on top of the taxi cabs to watch Abby and Harley brawl in the middle of the Tokyo streets, and they end up crushing like 4 or 5 taxi cabs. It sounded like one of those stories that was embellished as shit, but just the visual of it and the idea of it made me smile. So there's Abby and Harley being King Kong versus Godzilla.
Well, I've been in car accidents before with my car. Maybe I'll get in a car accident without a car.
Ooh.
Also, during this massive tear through wrestling history, on October 13th, 1978, Harley Race body slammed Andre the Giant, and then just because he felt like it, he did it again January 7th of 79.
The newspaper shot of the one in 78 is really fucking gorgeous because Harley talks about in the RF video how he pretty much like gorilla pressed him. It's not quite that, but he got his ass up there. And then he slams him on the concrete floor in the rematch. He gets good rotation on all of them.
Well, it's also during a time where Andre's a bit more nimble.
Yeah.
So Andre can kind of assist a little bit more. Also, too, Andre and Harley were good friends because Harley, being the NWA champion, he can rent better cars than most people. So when he would fly to the territory,
That makes sense.
he would rent a big Cadillac. And obviously Andre needs a big car to ride in. So Harley's like, well, Andre, why don't you just hop in a car with me? I got a big old car. All these other guys in the territory are driving around in these gas-saving cars that are tiny.
Pintos.
Yeah, so just hop in with me. We'll do the whole loop together since we're doing the whole loop, and probably just drinking beers left and right and just going down the road. Those two probably got along pretty well, and probably Harley's like, what if I slammed you? and Andre's probably drunk enough to be like, yeah, sure, that's something great. Let's do that tomorrow. And then they get in the ring, and then Andre's like, oh, no. And then Harley's like, slam. And Andre's like, oh, okay. Because what are you going to do to Harley Race? Even though you're Andre the Giant.
Yeah.
Do you want to try? Do you want to try?
Even Jim Ross said when Harley was around, Harley was the boss. You said he body slammed him, but did you mention the suplex?
Yeah, Flair said something about the suplex.
Yeah, he's. I think it was the 78 match because it's not in the 79. That he said he suplexed him and held him up. But Harley said it too. Flair's word, I'm not taking too much, but Harley seems like a pretty stand-up dude, so I'll buy that he's the only man to hold suplex vertical Andre.
When it was all said and done, Harley Race would hold the NWA title for almost 5 years, barring some very short trade-offs with Tommy Rich, Dusty Rhodes, and Giant Baba. By the end of his run, Harley was a 6-time world champion.
The whole story goes that Giant Baba had a paper bag with $25,000 and is like, let me have that NWA belt. And then it turns out Giant Baba basically also did that with Jack Briscoe during his run and had a 5-day run. And then Baba did the $25,000 in 79 to Harley, and then they switched about 6 days later. And then in 80, they did it again for about 3 or 4 days. So Baba did the $25,000 deal probably about 3 times. They're fun matches. This is going to sound like I'm shitting on him, but it's just because I haven't watched enough. But when Giant Baba could fucking wrestle, man, he was good. And the matches around here is when Baba could still move, and he's doing Russian leg sweeps and headlock takeovers. And man, the headlock takeover is one thing you got to bring up with Harley, because he would do this great like poetic ballet-ic little float over that was almost like a cartwheel every time, that, as Jake said, making his opponent look good. Harley would just look like, whoa, what the fuck was that? So yeah, Baba worked that money deal more than just the one time. And
the NWA was mostly cool with it. I think the NWA knew anytime that their champion went over to Japan that like something like this would probably happen. Mm-hmm. They're just like, just make sure you come back with the belt. Because also like, this is during the 70s and early 80s. And even in the 90s, people viewed whatever happened in Japan as something that's non-existent. Before the internet, before anything else. Like whatever happens over there doesn't matter, doesn't even really count. So it's even surprising that is even put in the history, because there were a lot of title switches that happened in New Zealand and Australia and Puerto Rico that are just not recognized whatsoever. But they're just as much validity as this Japan switches, but because Baba was kind of a part of the NWA Alliance and was putting a lot of money in a lot of their wrestlers' pockets and was going through the office and booking their champions, so they were getting a booking fee. But of course, the $25,000 was going right to Harley. So it was almost like a bonus for the champion that the NWA didn't have to shill out. So they're like, that's what made him probably cool with it. Like, oh, this is another bonus that we can give our champion. And another reason why we can trust our champion is because we're allowing him to make this. It's a very high spot thought process. I'm allowing you to make this bonus and not raising a stink. So you be thankful to me. Yeah. So it's one of those things.
That's your perk to not bitch about when I fuck you over later.
Yeah, or when I ask you for money for this.
Right.
So
also during this time, real quick, you just gotta touch on the Harley Race versus Jumbo Tsuruta matches, late 70s. They're one January 20th, 1978 match is considered one of Harley's best, but there's only 30 minutes on YouTube. It's a 2 out of 3 falls match. It went 60-minute draw, but there's not much I could find. It's good shit. At the end of the first fall, Harley chugs an entire beer in the ring, and then it's clipped after that. But the Jumbo Harley stuff's good stuff.
And all these other like small switches with Tommy Rich and Dusty is probably very similar to a situation of like, let's give it a shot and see if we can pop this territory or get things going or add some credibility. Like Tommy Rich winning the NWA World Title in Georgia, and he was the hottest thing going in Georgia.
Yeah, biggest babyface.
And you couldn't get any hotter than Tommy Rich in Georgia at that time. And when you get to that level, like where is there to go? So you as the local promoter is trying to do so much with Tommy Rich, and it's getting to a point like, I don't know what else we can do with him.
And it helps that Jim Barnett, who was the promoter there at the time, and also with the NWA, it was just kind of a perfect storm of shit to work out.
Yeah, and once he's won it, then from then on, in that area, you can say former NWA World Heavyweight title holder Tommy Rich, and that's where if he's just kind of at that level of just big over guy, but now he's reached the mountaintop and now he's here, but then also too, guys can end up beating Tommy or going over on Tommy, and then that makes them and elevates them too. And then Harley has somebody to wrestle when he's back in the territory.
I think the only time the NWA title was ever changed hands on a DQ was when Harley got it back from Dusty, where they had the whole top rope DQ thing, but the DQ rule was waived, so you could lose the belt on a DQ. Yeah. So there was a whole thing where Dusty got his arm busted up by Terry Funk, but then apparently Dusty's ego was too big to lay down the belt, so He couldn't even be a one-arm man losing to him, so they just did this DQ rule bullshit. And apparently at the time, like, even Bill Apter magazines didn't even say what the actual finish was because everybody was so fucking embarrassed for it. I guess it's just like the Fiend, Seth Rollins type shit, but for back in the early 80s. It sounded like a huge fucking just disaster. Lots of smart marks were pissed.
And Harley would like make these guys in these territories, getting the hour Broadways that we discussed multiple times and multiple different people. But the match he had with David Von Erich on St. Louis television, which was actually like a weird handicap match where like Fritz would come in.
But Fritz never enters the match.
He never enters the match. Yeah. It's been a while since I've seen it.
Yeah.
It's top 5, one of my favorite matches of all time. Just the put over job that Harley Race does on television.
Yeah.
Of all things, he gets juice from the Iron Claw.
Oh, it's such a good spot.
And
it's such a good
just
spot.
the way that he makes David Von Erich on St. Louis television. And I said the importance of St. Louis television, the fact that he's making this star out of David Von Erich. Like all this discussion that you see in all these documentaries, these world-class documentaries about David Von Erich, he could have been a world champion, all this discussion, it all stems from basically Harley Race doing this on television and having other subsequent matches with him. But this one in particular was a star-making match, an event there on television for free.
Yeah.
And that's the strength and what Harley Race did for people. He would make opponents, and really kind of one of the first NWA champions to recognize that we need to make opponents and I need to come back and make these opponents. And it was kind of a formula that Flair capitalized on, but the person that was the trailblazer in that was Harley Race.
I watched this match about 2 days ago, and Jake is 100% on from however long he watched it. It's hot as shit, and the claw spot where Harley goes for the diving headbutt, David catches him in it, and then he holds it so long where Harley starts juicing, and you can see Harley do the little neck, but he does it so fucking good, it's almost imperceptible. And oh my god, the selling of it of Harley covered in blood after the claw and everyone cheering. Oh my! It's fucking goosebumps. It's great TV.
And Harley took being NWA World Heavyweight Champion as like a job and come into every territory and make his opponents and make everybody look good. But much like in all of our jobs, we like to goof around and have a good time. And sometimes Harley would find humor in some of the more odder things. And this particular story, which I heard directly from Tony Atlas, is a perfect example of it. As we know, Tony Atlas was known as Mr. USA because he won the Mr. USA bodybuilding competition. And shortly after Tony won that competition, he had some pictures made up of him on stage at the Mr. USA competition, and he was going to sell them at his gimmick table. And he had the pictures, and he was in the locker room in Georgia Championship Wrestling, and he was showing all the guys like, hey, took all these pictures of me winning the Mr. USA competition, and they're really nice pictures of him in his posing trunks and his number on and everything with the big trophy and all that stuff. And Ole walked in and saw this, and Ole knew that Harley Race was coming into the territory, and they had some NWA title matches set up. So Ole, right at the top of his head, like, oh, this guy just won Mr. USA. Tony's a capable performer, and I think even at this time he's wrestled Harley a couple of times. This makes sense. So what Ole said was, he goes, Tony, I want you to wear the same exact trunks that you're wearing in these pictures when you wrestle Harley Race in the Omni next week. And Tony's like, well, these are bodybuilding posing trunks. They don't really give you the support in the areas you need support in when you're wrestling. And then Ole looked right at him and said, listen, if they're good enough to be worn on a stage in New York, they're good enough for you to wear in the main event in the Omni in Atlanta. Tony's like, all right. And I think they were like kind of like a fuchsia type color, and they were very cut, very high. They were kind of risque, like a little more like gay strip club-esque than actual wrestling trunks. They're a little foo-fooey for professional wrestling at the time, would probably be the most polite way to say it. So anyways, Tony has him on, and before the match happens, obviously meets with Harley, and then Harley takes a look at the trunks, and he's just like, and it just kind of laughs at him. And Tony's like, oh, this is what Ole wants. He wants to do this. He said, if they're good enough for a stage in New York, they're good enough for the main event in the Omni. And I was like, okay. So they get out there and they're wrestling, and I think they're gonna do like a Broadway or whatever. I think it is like an hour draw, and they're getting out there and they're wrestling, and about like 20 minutes in, Tony's keeping his dick as supported as possible, some way as possible. But Tony's talking about it. It's so funny listening to Tony Atlas tell the story. He goes, "I was telling Ole, you're like, it's telling Ole gets the support, and my junk is staying where it's supposed to be. It's staying where it's supposed to be. It's kind of come out a little bit, but it's okay. It's okay at the time. It was 20 minutes in, and then Harley Race goes, backdrop me, and Tony's like, oh no,
Oh shit!
and so he whips Harley off. And Harley, if you've ever seen him take backdrops before, it's a little different than Flair. Harley will post a really high on the lower back and get his head up to show more of his face as he's getting flipped over, as opposed to going up and high. Like, he doesn't take a very high backdrop, but he takes a very animated backdrop.
He really sells it too.
Yeah, and you can see his face and his terror as he's going over. That's as opposed to creating a bunch of height and making it look spectacular that way. Well, he's posting very, very high on the lower back, but for whatever reason, he slides his hands down into Tony's trunks. So when Tony backdrops Harley, as Harley goes over, he grabs a hold of these posing trunks.
Oh no!
And as he's falling down, gravity ends up pulling the trunks down. And as you may or may not know, most of the guys that wear trunks don't wear anything underneath. Hence why wearing posing trunks is such a scary situation, because
my dick is so close.
Yeah, but where you have a little more support with wrestling trunks, but posing trunks you don't have that at all. So Harley grabs a hold, and Tony Atlas basically has backdropped himself out of his trunks and then stumbles out, and they come completely off his ankles and off of his feet. Now Harley has Tony's posing trunks in his hand. Wrestling's real. It's a fight. Harley Race takes the trunks, wads them up, and throws them into the crowd.
Oh, no.
And as Tony Atlas said in telling of the story, he goes, "There I was in the middle of the Omni with my dick hanging out. All these white women in the crowd with the big old eyes looking at this big man naked in the middle of the Omni." And the thing is, too, once again, pro wrestling's real fight. You're not going to stop. So Harley goes back to calling spots with a butt-naked Tony Atlas.
I don't know. In a real fight, if I'm butt naked, I'd probably just run away.
Well, Tony was running the ropes, and he said, he goes, "There was, my dick was just flopping around, running the ropes." And it was another 10 minutes before somebody came from the back. Somebody got into Tony's bag, got another pair of like wrestling trunks, brought it out to the ring, and then gave him some trunks, and he put them on to finish the hour of Broadway. So for a good chunk of an hour of Broadway at the Omni in Atlanta, Harley Race wrestled a butt-naked Tony Atlas, African-American gentleman in the middle of the South. So heard that story directly from Tony Atlas. So if you ever see Tony Atlas at a show, I highly recommend that you ask him about that story. Listening to Tony Atlas tell it, it's fucking priceless.
Speaking of Tony Atlas, one quick urban legend I heard was at one point Tony was maybe going to get the NWA belt, but he had to sell out the Omni against Harley, and he didn't sell it out, and Harley hung on to the belt. It's most likely bullshit, but I like the idea of just Tony just sitting there watching people like, "Come on, we need more," and then they're just like, "Shit, 20 short."
He did everything he could. He whipped his dick out and everything. He did everything he could to sell out that building.
Harley's title run finally came to an end in Georgia Championship Wrestling, July 21st, 1981, when he passed the torch to the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes. He's got a bicycle. Dusty Rhodes eventually lost the title to up-and-coming star Ric Flair, which led to Harley Race beating Flair in St. Louis in 1983 for his 7th reign as champion. Harley next would begin the climb to one of the biggest shows the NWA had ever done, the WrestleMania before there was a WrestleMania, Starrcade 83, and that's where we'll pick up on part 2 of the great Harley Race, with Harley taking on Ric Flair in a match that would end in murder.
Oh, shit. Director's cut shit I don't even know about.
What version are you watching on the WWE Network?
I'm trying to make sure people will listen to part 2.
They're going to listen. There's plenty of Jake Manning personal stories with Harley Race where he almost murdered me. There we go. So.
There we go. All right, so that is part 1 on Harley Race. Thanks for listening to Tim Bell Pod. Please leave us a rating and a review wherever you're listening. That just helps us out. Head over to patreon.com/10bellpod if you want to give us some United States currency. Find us on social media at 10bellpod. Support Six Squirrel Studios, who helps us do all our podcasting stuff. I'm Nicolessa on all the social medias. Micah's JTrotter27 on Twitter. And the Man Scout is at Man Scout Manning on all the social medias.
Part 2 coming up. Murder. Ah!
Hi, it's The Undertaker. I just want to remind you, head over to patreon.com/10bellpod so that you can donate to the podcast if you enjoyed this episode. Rest in peace, guys.